Hi, welcome back. Cranial nerves part 2. We'll begin by talking about the facial and the vestibulocochlear nerves, the 7th and the 8th cranial nerves. The facial nerve has many components, as you can see here. I will point out some sensory components for the concha, and also with one communicating branch between the dorsal buccal branch and the auriculotemporal nerve. We talked about it. And the auricular branch of the vagus is motor for the facial muscles and the gastricus, stylohyoideus, jugulohyoideus, and stapedial muscles. It also has visceral components, and we shouldn't forget general somatic afferent. There is no proprioception from the facial muscles. There is no evidence for proprioceptive afferents in the facial nerve that innervates the superficial muscles of the face. Except for the digastric muscle, it seems that lacks muscle spindles. However, the proprioceptive feedback is replaced by mechanical sensation from the teeth. In this case, for the facial, we have to remember that all the sensation comes through the trigeminal nerve. So when the facial muscles contract, the skin also moves and sends information through the trigeminal nerve to the central nervous system. The facial nerve has two roots. One is the motor root. It's from the motor nucleus of the facial nerve to the muscles of the face. The intermediate root is for visceral components. It's from the parasympathetic nucleus of the facial nerve to the pterygopalatine ganglion, and the parasympathetic nucleus of the intermediate nerve to the mandibular and sublingual glands. Here in this image, you have a transverse section of a dog's head fixed with formaldehyde, and you can identify clearly the facial and vestibulocochlear nerves. As you know, they are together, facial and vestibulocochlear. So in a transverse section, it's difficult to identify which one is facial and which one is vestibulocochlear. Here again, you have the first one is the more rostral one is the facial nerve, and then caudally is the vestibulocochlear nerve. We also see in this image, this white line here represents the facial nerve because the motor nucleus of the facial nerve is located around here. So the fibers go around the nucleus of the abducens nerve and then go out of the brainstem, these fibers here. So here we say that there is the internal ganglia or internal knee or the internal knee of the facial nerve, the internal genu, also named internal genu of the facial nerve. So where are these nuclei? So the motor nucleus of the facial nerve is located this area here. So in this area. And remember that the fibers go around the motor nucleus of the abducens nerve and then go out. They live between the spinal tract of the trigeminal nerve and the rubrospinal tract, and they incorporate to the facial nerve. So let's have a look in the cranium where the facial nerve goes through. So the facial nerve, together with the vestibulocochlear, they enter the internal acoustic meatus. They are surrounded by the same dura mater. Once inside the petrossal portion of the temporal bone, they divide the vestibulocochlear from the facial. And the facial enters the facial canal, excavated in the petrous portion of the temporal bone. It's going to branch off some nerves. The first is the nerve of the pterygoid canal, or Vidian nerve. This nerve lives through this small foramen located on the rim of the rostral alar foramen. When I say the nerve of the pterygoid canal, I'm saying the Mesopetrosal Nerve that incorporates sympathetic nerve fibers and becomes the nerve of the pterygoid canal or median nerve. This nerve lives through this foramen and reaches the pterygopalatine ganglion. Another branch of the facial nerve inside the canal of the facial nerve inside the petrossal portion of the temporal bone is the chorda tympani. The chorda tympani lives through the petrotympanic fissure, that one here, and joins the lingual nerve, that is a branch of the mandibular trigeminal nerve. The rest of the fibers of the facial leave the cranium through the stylomastoid foramen, just caudal to the acoustic meatus. So in this drawing, we will understand much better these fibers. This represents the internal acoustic meatus. So all the roots of the two roots of the facial nerve enter this internal acoustic meatus. And they run in the facial canal, inside the petrous portion of the temporal bone. The motor root is this orange line here. Here we have the genu, the external genu of the facial nerve, where the geniculate ganglion is located. And the fibers live through the stylomastoid foramen. However, it also has sensory fibers from the lateral internal auricular nerve. Okay. And the nucleus of these cells are located in the geniculate ganglion. The intermediate root is for visceral, efferents and afferents. The efferents go through the canal of the facial nerve, and when they reach the genu, where the geniculate ganglion is, they leave, some of the fibers leave, forming the Mesopetrosal Nerve. And this Mesopetrosal Nerve will be joined by sympathetic fibers from the carotical tympanic branch, and together form the nerve of the pterygoid canal or median nerve that reaches the pterygopalatine ganglion. Other efferent visceral fibers continue and leave after the geniculate ganglion to form the chorda tympani that joins the lingual nerve, that is a branch of the mandibular nerve, trigeminal nerve. This lingual nerve is also formed by afferent fibers, visceral afferent fibers. These ones transmit taste, right? Okay. And they go up and enter the cranial cavity. They go to the brainstem, these ones, okay? And also, the motor root branches off inside the canal of the facial nerve, the stapedial nerve, to the stapedius muscle. Okay, now we go back to the cranium. We are going to look at this area. And we see, as we have seen in the video, through this small foramen, on the rim of the rostral alar foramen, is where it leaves the median nerve, the nerve of the pterygoid canal. So this nerve is formed by the Mesopetrosal nerve and sympathetic nerve fibers. Here, but this foramen can be very small, or sometimes it does not exist. When it does not exist, the median nerve lives through the rostral alar foramen. Here you have transverse sections in axial tomography, computer axial tomography. Here you have the promontorium, the cochlea, right? And the facial nerve inside the facial canal. As you see, the facial, one branch of the facial is the chorda tympani. And this chorda tympani enters the middle ear and travels medial to the malleus, to the manubrium of the malleus, here. Here you have the cochlear window. Tensor tympani muscle is this one here. This is innervated by the trigeminal nerve, right? and you can identify other structures, the cochlea, as it is a dog, the carotid canal with the internal carotid artery and sympathetic nerve fibers, and the Petrobasilar canal with the ventral petrossal sinus. So now we are going to open the middle ear, the bulla tympanica. We have opened it, and we identify the tympanic membrane sectioned, the manubrium of the malleus here, and the coda tympani going around the malleus. Okay. There we have the promontory. Okay, but we are going to focus in here now, the coda tympani. Here we have a video where you can identify the coda tympani. You see here the tympanic membrane, the malleus here, the promontory, and the coda tympani. This is the coda tympani. You can move it. And here I am marking the promontory with the tympanic plexus, but this belongs to other cranial nerve. So again, we focus in this middle ear. We see the promontory there are some fibers here. We will talk about later. These fibers is the tympanic plexus. And then you have here the tensor tympani muscle, right? And the malleus with the manubrium of the malleus. And going around is the coda tympani. Also, you can identify other structures as the cochlear window, the stapes, the incus, right, and that articulates with the malleus. Now, this coda tympani is going to live through the petrotympanic fissure that is located here. And as it is very close to the exit of the mandibular nerve, it joins the lingual nerve that is a branch of the mandibula. When it joins this, okay, it's joining through the coda tympani, right, the lingual nerve, and then these fibers are visceral motor and visceral sensory, right? They reach the mandibular ganglion located in the ileus of the mandibular gland and the sublingual ganglion that is located between the connecting branch of the coda tympani to the gland and the lingual nerve. Postganglionic fibers, parasympathetic nerve fibers, will reach the mandibular gland and the sublingual gland, whether it is monostomatic or polystomatic. Okay. Now we are going to look at a dissection. We remove the zygomatic muscle and we identify the branches of the facial that have been exit the cranial cavity through the stylomastoid foramen. This is the auriculopalpebral nerve. Okay, with the palpebral branch and the auricular branch. Remember that these fibers are just motor fibers, not sensory fibers. Sensory information comes through the trigeminal nerve. Look how the auricular branch is running together with the auricular temporal nerve. This is a branch of the mandibula that is sensory to this auriculotemporal region and also carries postganglionic glossopharyngeal fibers from the otic ganglion to innervate the parotid salivary gland. Now we have the dorsal buccal branch of the facial and the ventral buccal branch of the facial. Both are motor. Both nerves, they mix here at the level of the buccinator. And what I am pointing is a connection between the ventral buccal branch and the mylohyoid nerve that is trigeminous. This mylohyoid nerve incorporates sensory fibers to the ventral buccal branch that run with the facial nerve, and they are going to be sensory for the caudal portion of the lower lip. This is the nerve here. Cervical nerve here, and the caudal auricular nerve, motor, just motor. The auriculotemporal nerve that we said is a branch of the mandibula and is sensory and motor for the parotid gland. Then we have this one is the transverse nerve of the face that is trigeminal, that is sensory. And it sends a branch that is a communicating branch with the dorsal buccal branch here. So it means that this portion of the facial is just motor, but when it is joined by this nerve here, that belongs to the trigeminal nerve, that is sensory, from this point rostally, it becomes sensory motor. And this one in particular is for the sensory information from the caudal portion of the upper lip. Is this one. This is a sensory nerve from the trigeminal nerve, a branch of the auriculotemporal. So remember that the dorsal buccal branch and the ventral buccal branch are motor. However, they incorporate sensory fibers from the trigeminal nerve. This is the great auricular nerve, a branch of the second cervical spinal nerve that is just sensory. No, we are going to focus in this square here, and we look carefully and we see branches of the facial that are the internal auricular nerves that are sensory. And one of these branches is the lateral internal auricular nerve that is facial but has incorporated fibers from the vagus. So this draw here will make us understand easier. The vagus nerve branches off the auricular branch of the vagus at the level of the jugular foramen. This nerve joins the facial in the facial canal and incorporate, as it is incorporated to the facial, leaves through the stylomastoid foramen and then leaves the facial in order to form the lateral internal auricular nerve that is going to be sensory for the external ear canal. Here, we focus in this image here, in this square, and we'll see the ventral buccal branch of the facial that is joined by the mylohyoid nerve, a branch of the mandibular nerve that is trigeminal. And this branch here is just sensory and joins the facial in order to reach with the facial nerve this area here to sensory innervate the posterior portion of the lower lip. Again, we focus now, this is the digastric muscle, right? With the caudal belly and the rostral belly. Remember that the rostral belly is innervated by a branch of the mylohyoid nerve. The stylohyoideus that goes on top. So this stylohyoideus and this caudal belly of the digastricus are innervated by the facial nerve. Okay. You see in this image is an animal that presents a lesion in the rostral belly of the digastricus. So and also it has affected all the masticatory muscles here innervated by the mandibula. This was an animal with a lesion of the mandibular nerve, trigeminus. And can you see that the caudal belly is not affected because the caudal belly is innervated by the facial nerve. Here you have another case where you have the digastricus here, right? And as we progress caudally, we see that the caudal belly of the digastricus is damaged, okay? is damaged. And then you see in this dorsal section, you see this hyperintense signal that is a lesion affecting the brainstem, but also the facial nerve. So the vestibulocochlear nerve. The vestibulocochlear nerve is formed by two nerves. The vestibular nerve that receives information from the vestibulum about the balance, so it's a special proprioception, and the cochlear nerve that comes from the cochlea, involved in hearing, so it's a special exteroceptive sensation. So the two nerves, once they get inside the cranial cavity, they become vestibular root or vestibular or cochlear root. Together, these vestibulocochlear roots enter the brainstem at the trapezoid body level. So again, here, transverse section, you see here, this is the facial and vestibulocochlear nerves together. And in particular, the vestibulocochlear takes information from the inner ear, from the vestibulum and from the cochlea. On MRIs, you see facial and vestibulocochlear, and the vestibulocochlear transmitting information from the inner ear. Here you see the cochlea and the promontory here, or in this case, facial and vestibulocochlear coming from the inner ear. So now we have to move to the glossopharyngeal nerve, that is the 9th cranial nerve, the vagus, that is the 10, accessory, that is the 11, and hypoglossal nerve, that is the 12 cranial nerves. And again, considered together because they share areas, anatomical areas. The glossopharyngeal nerve, again, has many components. They range from general somatic afferent, in particular this one, because it's sensory to the meninges of the caudal fossa and tentorium. So remember, the meninges are sensory innervated by the trigeminal nerve and glossopharyngeal nerve. And we'll see that the vagus also receives sensation. It also has a special visceral efferent because it goes to the tensor veli palatini, pharyngeal muscles, etc. And visceral components, whether they are efferent or afferent. Afferent for the taste, right? And what about proprioception? Does it has general somatic afferent proprioceptive fibers? It seems that even though they do not have the classical spindle fibers, however, they have some spindle-like receptors that respond to the stretch. So, and they transmit proprioception from pharyngeal and laryngeal muscles. And the role is very important in regulation of swallowing. So we remove another encephalon from the cranial cavity and we see some nerves, okay? So we identify here, at which level are we? This is the trapezoid body, this is the abduction nerve right here. So here you have the glossopharyngeal and vagus nerve, and caudally the hypoglossus, okay? So we go to the cranium, and we are going to see in the cranium the glossopharyngeal nerve together with the vagus, they enter the jugular foramen together as well with the accessory cranial nerve. It is important to point out that the jugular foramen can only be seen from the inside of the cranial cavity, not from the outside, because the jugular foramen leads to the tympanoccipital fissure that is located caudal to the bulla tympanica, here, tympanoccipital fissure. So, one of the branches of the glossopharyngeal nerve is the tympanic nerve. The tympanic nerve enters the bulla tympanica and on top of the promontory forms the tympanic plexus. Fibers from the tympanic plexus, they join to form the minor petrossal nerve that leaves the middle ear through a small foramen and reaches a ganglion that is located very close to the oval foramen where the mandibula exits. This is the otic ganglion. Postganglionic fibers, parasympathetic fibers from the glossopharyngeal nerve, they join the auriculotemporal nerve in order to reach the parotid gland salivary gland, and others join the buccal nerve in order to go and reach the zygomatic gland, another salivary gland characteristics of the carnivores. Okay. Here I have marked the rest of the fibers of the glossopharyngeal nerve exiting through the tympanoccipital fissure. So again, we go back to the middle ear. So this transverse section will show us the bulla tympanica, the petrobascular canal with the ventropetrosal sinus, the carotid canal with internal carotid artery and sympathetic nerve fibers, the promontory, the cochlea, right? And the malleus. And here on top of the promontory, we open a bulla and we see on top of the promontory, we see the tympanic plexus that is formed by visceral fibers from the glossopharyngeal nerve. So we focus this area here. This is a cranium, and here, just to allow you to locate, this is the temporal bone. This is the temporal bone. I have removed part of the temporal muscle, and we see here we have the mandibular nerve with its branches, the auriculotemporal, right, the lingual nerve, etc. Here we have the buccal nerve going rostrally, and we identify that is the cauda tympani, these facial, visceral, efferent and afferent fibers from the facial that join the lingual nerve. Okay, and here a bit more dorsally, we found the Mesopetrosal Nerve. Let's go to this image, and here again we have we are at this area, okay, and we see the otic ganglion. The otic ganglion is very close. This is the trigeminal nerve. So here we have the oval foramen, and the otic ganglion is located at the level of the oval foramen. And the otic ganglion is formed by the postganglionic fibers of the glossopharyngeal visceral efferent parasympathetic nerve fibers, and the postganglionic nerve fibers, they form this nerve, okay, these fibers here that are going to join the auriculotemporal nerve here or the buccal nerve. Okay, so the otic ganglion is located here. So the Mesopetrosal nerve is too small, so small that as soon as it leaves the Mesopetrosal nerve through this foramen, it finds the otic ganglion here. So Mesopetrosal nerve is minor. So it is very close to the cauda tympani. This is why both nerves are too close, cauda tympani and the postganglionic fibers from the otic ganglion, and very close to the oval foramen where the mandibular nerve exits the cranial cavity. So in this video, we'll show you this, the cauda tympani, and these postganglionic fibers coming from the otic ganglion, joining the auriculotemporal and the buccal nerve. And so you see as well the cauda tympani joining the lingual nerve. This is the lingual nerve. Okay, you see, this is the, all right, this nerve here. You see, the yellow arrow points to the otic ganglion. Okay. So we move to the vagus. 80% of the axons that form the vagus are general visceral afferent. This is important to notice. And you see the vagus has also many components, and even general somatic afferent, because it seems that it's sensory to the meninges of the caudal fossa and tentorium together with the glossopharyngeal nerve. And also it has fibers from the auricular branch of the vagus, this branch that has joined the facial nerve. It has a motor component, right? Special visceral afferent, two laryngeal, pharyngeal muscles, esophagus, levator belli palatini, etc., motor to the palatino, etc. And also the general visceral and general visceral efferent and afferent. And what about proprioception? It seems that afferents from the laryngeal muscles form part of the cranial laryngeal and laryngeal recurrent nerves. sending information about proprioception of these muscles. Okay, go back to the brain stem, and in a transverse section, we see where these nuclei are located. So we have here the parasympathetic nucleus of the glossopharyngeus and vagus. This is the fourth ventricle here. The caudal cerebellar peduncle, the pyramids, the olivary nucleus right here, the middle longitudinal fasciculus right here, okay? And here also we begin to find the motor nucleus of the hypoglossal nerve. These areas here form the solitary tract and the nucleus of the solitary tract. So this is for the parasympathetic, but we have seen that also it has other types of neurons, right? So somatic, so they form the nucleus ambiguus, and the nucleus ambiguus is located around here, formed by the glossopharyngeus and vagus. They are motor fibers for the vagus and for the glossopharyngeal nerve, located at this level. And a bit more caudally, the motor nucleus we found the motor nucleus of the accessory cranial nerve. It's the same column, but this one is located, this motor nucleus of the accessory cranial nerve is located caudal to the nucleus ambiguus, caudal to this column here. So the vagus lives through the jugular foramen and then through the tympano-occipital fissure, right here. So, and in its trajectory, there are two ganglia. One is the proximal ganglion, that is also named jugular ganglion for the general somatic afferent fibers, and the second is the distal ganglion for the general visceral afferent and special visceral afferent fibers. So the distal is for visceral and the proximal is for somatic afferent fibers. As you see in this image, glossopharyngeus and vagus are living together, and they enter together with the accessory cranial nerve, the jugular foramen. Once outside of the cranial cavity, they form together the glossopharyngeus and vagus, the pharyngeal plexus, and the vagus comes down, form the cranial laryngeal nerve, and continues caudally to the thoracic region, where they turn around the aorta, the arch of the aorta or the right subclavian artery, and they form the recurrent laryngeal nerve that goes back to the larynx and then becomes the codolaryngeal nerve. The rest of the parasympathetic fibers of the vagus, they are distributed in the thoracic and abdominal cavity. So at the thoracic cavity, as you see, the left vagus nerve sends fibers that go around the arch of the aorta in the left side or in the right side around the right subclavian artery, and they go up. Here you have the fibers that have gone around the arch of the aorta and they go up again. The rest of the fibers of the vagus, prior reaching the diaphragm, they branch off in a dorsal vagal branch and a ventral vagal branch. Each branch joins its homologous, its counterpart. So the dorsal vagal branch of the right joins the dorsal vagal branch of the left in order to become the dorsal vagal trunk. The same is going to happen with the ventral vagal branches. So like that, around the esophagus, they cross the diaphragm in the hiatus esophagicus. As we have said, some of the fibers, they go up the recurrent laryngeal nerve, and at the beginning at the caudal portion of the neck, the recurrent laryngeal nerve gives off the pararecurrent laryngeal nerve. Is this one here? The pararecurrent goes together up and innervates the esophagus, as you see here, and the trachea. So innervation of the esophagus and trachea are from the recurrent laryngeal nerve. Now we are going to see a video of the larynge. Here you have the thyroid cartilage, the trachea, and we are going to start by removing the cricothyroideus muscle. and we are going to open the thyroid cartilage. As you see, it's an unpaired cartilage. We have to cut it, and we remove half of this thyroid cartilage. And then the first muscle we see is the right here, thyroarytenoid muscle. And here is the cranial laryngeal nerve with its internal branch here. That is sensory, and this is the anastomotic branch that joins the recurrent laryngeal nerve, that at this level becomes the codolaryngeal nerve. It seems that it is involved in transmission of information from carotid bodies and from aortic bodies, from the aortic bodies. Okay? Now we are going to partially remove and finally remove completely the thyroarytenoid muscle, and we identify a part of it that is the vocal muscle. These muscles are innervated by the codolaryngeal nerve. Now we are going to show the ventricle of the larynge. As it is a dog, it has a ventricle. This pouch that extends laterally from the larynge. Okay, we have removed part of the thyroarytenoideus. We clearly see all these branches of the codolaryngeal nerve innervating the muscles of the larynge, except the cricothyroid muscle. You see the cricoarytenoideus dorsalis, cricoarytenoideus lateralis. This is the cricoarytenoideus lateralis, the vocal muscle. As you see, they are all innervated by the codolaryngeal nerve. And there you have the ventricular muscle that is, its function is to open the ventricle. It is also innervated by the codolaryngeal nerve. And this is the internal branch that is sensory for the mucosa of the larynge. The hyoid bone or hyoid apparatus here. So the accessory, what about the accessory? The accessory has also many components. Classically, they say they have a special visceral efferent, general somatic efferent. This one, it is some fibers from the internal branch of the accessory that join the recurrent laryngeal nerve. So it's a special visceral efferent, and the general somatic efferent is the external branch that innervates the trapezius, homotransversarius, sternocephalicus, and cleidocephalicus. Okay. And also, what about it is sensory, because it's sensory to the nerve that is motor innervating, of course. And the general somatic afferent for proprioception. Of course, these muscles need proprioception. However, there is no sensory ganglia in the accessory nerve, but the presence of communications between the accessory nerve and the cervical spinal nerves, they have been proposed that the soma of these afferent fibers from the accessory may be located in the dorsal root ganglia of the spinal nerves. Here I show you a craniotomy, and I have performed a laminectomy as well at the level of the atlas, right? What do we see? We see the brain, the spinal cord comes to the brainstem, the cerebellum, parts of the cerebral hemispheres, and you see the roots that form the first cervical spinal nerve. And underneath comes the spinal roots of the accessory nerve. As they enter in the cranial cavity through the foramen magnum, they are joined by the cranial roots. So, the accessory nerve is formed by spinal roots whose motor neurons are located in the gray matter of in the spinal cord from segments from C7 up to C1. And this nerve goes up in the supraarachnoid space between the dorsal and ventral roots of the spinal nerves, and it enters the cranial cavity through the foramen magnum. Once inside, is joined by the cranial roots in order to form the external branch of the accessory that lives through the jugular foramen, in order to innervate the trapezius, homotransversarius, sternocephalicus, and cleidocephalicus. However, there is a communication between the cranial roots and the vagus nerve. This communication is the internal branch. And this internal branch carries accessory fibers to the vagus. And these fibers will form part of the recurrent laryngeal nerve. So where is the motor nucleus located? Is around here, is caudal to the nucleus, and here is the motor nucleus of the nucleus ambiguus, and caudally located we have the motor nucleus of the accessory. So it's the same column. And ambiguous, okay, first we have the motor nucleus of the facial, so then we have the nucleus ambiguus, glossopharyngeal and vagus, and then we have the motor nucleus of the accessory cranial nerve. So again, we are going to compare this image that I have shown you before with MRIs. What you see, this is at the level of the pons, medulla oblongata, right? Here we identify the glossopharyngeus and the vagus leading, and there we have an image, and this signal here corresponds to the accessory cranial nerve. And because you see, runs lateral to the spinal cord and then enters lateral to the medulla oblongata. And in a transverse section at the level of the medulla oblongata, we see the CSF around here. Okay, we see the condyloid canals with the basilar sinus, and here we have the central canal, part of the cerebellum, and these black dots here, hypointense signals, correspond to the accessory cranial nerve here. Okay, also here and here. So you can identify this nerve on MRIs. So again, we see that this nerve is located with the spinal nerves, with spinal roots, entering, joined by the cranial roots. And if we look carefully, we see that this nerve runs under the roots of that form the cervical spinal nerves. Here, you see, here, in the supraarachnoid space. It is located in the supraarachnoid space. And it seems to come from, they say, from C7, but I have never seen at C7 this nerve. I only identify this nerve from C6 up to C1. So now we have to talk about the hypoglossal nerve. Again, it has the general somatic efferent component that innervates the muscles of the tongue, thyrohyoideus and genihyoideus muscle. Okay. Occasionally, the sternohyoideus is also innervated by the hypoglossal nerve. And we say that the sensory sensation, pain, general somatic afferent sensation, it goes through the lingual nerve, nociceptive, and possibly could be proprioceptive. However, it seems that there are receptors that respond to stretch. Okay, even though there is no sensory ganglion, but there are afferents that respond to stretch. And the possible location of the soma of these afferent neurons may be in the dorsal root ganglion of C1, because there are communications between the hypoglossal nerve and the C1 spinal nerve. However, it has been proposed as well the proximal vagal ganglion of the vagus. Okay, and also sympathetic fibers may be involved with this nerve. So first, this nerve is going to live through the hypoglossal canal. Here I show you the hypoglossal canal that is located. Here I show you first the tympano-occipital fissure, and then caudal to it we have the hypoglossal canal in the occipital bone. And you can see the piece of string inside the cranial cavity. So if we make now transverse sections and we study them on MRIs, you see the medulla oblongata here, cerebellum with the vermis of the cerebellum and the cerebellar hemispheres, paramedian lobule right here. So here is the basilar artery, and this foramen here is for the exit of the hypoglossal nerve, okay? If we go a bit more caudal to this condyloid canal, caudal to the hypoglossal canal, you do not see the exit of the hypoglossal nerve, but you see the accessory cranial nerve. So here, this is another encephalon that is removed from the cranial cavity, and you can identify the big hypoglossal nerve that is formed by several small roots right here, and is going through the condyloid canal, right? The basilar artery, circulus arteriosus cerebri, hypophysis again, okay? The pons, trapezoid body, everything caudal to the pons is the medulla oblongata. So let's go to another dissection in a video. Here I show you this is the hypoglossal nerve here, all right? So this is the hypoglossal nerve with some fibers reaching the thyrohyoid, okay? And then you have the common carotid artery and the vagosympathetic trunk. And here, this nerve here is the first cervical spinal nerve that goes down to innervate the sternohyoideus and the sternothyroideus muscle. And here you have the accessory. So now we move the carotid artery, we move the C1, and we pick up the vagosympathetic trunk. And it's important here, you see, it's formed by vagal fibers and sympathetic nerve fibers. The sympathetic nerve fibers detach the vagus before the vagus reaches the distal ganglion of the vagus. And they are these sympathetic fibers, in order to reach the cranial cervical ganglion. It's very easy to distinguish sympathetic fibers from the vagal fibers here. Okay, and here we have the cranial cervical ganglion. And the pharyngeal plexus, with this in particular, is the cranial laryngeal nerve. This is the cranial laryngeal nerve. So again, you have the lingual branch of the glossopharyngeal nerve. All these fibers here are formed. We move the hypoglossal nerve, and we see the pharyngeal plexus formed by glossopharyngeal fibers, vagal fibers, and sympathetic nerve fibers coming from this ganglion here. That is the cranial cervical ganglion. So at this level, postganglionic fibers from sympathetic fibers, they join the glossopharyngeus, vagus, and accessory as well, cranial nerve. And here we have the pharyngeal plexus. So you see how the sympathetic nerve fibers detach from the vagus and reach the cranial cervical ganglion here. This is the distal ganglion of the vagus. And here we have the accessory cranial nerve. So now this is the styloglossus innervated by the hypoglossus, okay? And there we have running in this foramen between the stylopharyngeus and the hyopharyngeus, we have the lingual branch of the glossopharyngeal nerve. Remember that this is sensory for the caudal 2/3 of the tongue. Very easy to identify this stylopharyngeus and the pharyngeal branch of the the lingual branch of the Glossopharyngeal nerve. It is located between the stylopharyngeus and the hypopharyngeus. Then you have the pterygopharyngeus muscle and again glossopharyngeal fibers. The levator belli palatini muscle. All right, and then you clearly see the pterygopharyngeus muscle. Now again, we focus on this. This is the cranial laryngeal nerve with its external branch, sensory, and also this branch, this is the internal branch sensory, and this external branch that goes caudally and innervates the cricothyroideus muscle. This cricothyroideus muscle is the only muscle of the larynx that tenses the vocal folds. We remove the thyroid gland, and we see the recurrent laryngeal nerve, how it becomes the codolaryngeal nerve that is going to innervate all the muscles of the larynx with the exception of the cricothyroid muscle that is innervated by the cranial laryngeal nerve. So this one is the codolaryngeal nerve that goes under the cricopharyngeus, that is this one, cricopharyngeus muscle. And you see how it divides here, as we have seen in the previous video. And here you have the anastomotic branch between the codolaryngeal nerve and the internal branch of the cranial laryngeal nerve. This is the external, that is sensory motor. So again, we have in another video, we have the digastricus with the rostral belly, the caudal belly, the stylohyoideus muscle, the retropharyngeal lymph node, and we are going to remove it. We remove the retropharyngeal lymph node, and we see the hypoglossal nerve and its communication with the C1. This is the ansa cervicalis. No. Okay. And some fibers of the hypoglossal nerve that go to innervate the thyrohyoideus muscle. You see the communication between C1 and hypoglossal nerve. Again, close up, and we see the hypoglossal nerve is this one, and the branch that detaches the hypoglossal nerve and goes to innervate the geniohyoideus muscle. Again, in another picture, you see this hypoglossal nerve with a branch to the thyrohyoideus muscle, and also a branch of the glossopharyngeal nerve to the sternohyoideus. There you have the sternohyoideus. So the hypoglossal nerve is innervating the sternohyoideus together with C1. Okay? So this is a paralysis. This are the signs of a paralysis of the hypoglossus of the right side. Okay, this is an atrophy. And when the tongue is out of the mouth, it deviates towards the site of the lesion because the geniohyoideus muscle, it is damaged. Okay, it's innervated by the hypoglossal nerve. Thank you very much.